Pop quiz. About whom is it said that she walked like a queen, talked like a sage, and entertained like an Oriental potentate? We get it if your gut reaction is to say, who could possibly fit all these descriptions? Which is why it can only be associated with Flora Farha Sassoon. But who is she, and how did she gain such a unique title? Let's take a look. Flora was born into the notable Baghdadian Jewish family, the Sassoons on her mother's side. Known as the Rothschilds of the East, the Sassoon family came from Baghdad to Bombay in the early 19th century. In fact, they weren't the only ones. In the 1800s, many Arabic-speaking Jews from the Ottoman Empire and Persian-speaking Jews from Central Asia, who were not part of the local Bene Israel community, settled in Bombay. David S. Sassoon set up a prosperous business and soon became as influential, if not more, than his family was in Baghdad. From Bombay, the large family spread to China, England, and other countries. But Flora herself was born in Bombay in 1856. The oldest of 12, she continued in the footsteps of her well-educated parents. She was sent to a Catholic school, and her parents had rabbis brought in from Baghdad to teach her. She essentially got the best secular and religious education one could get, and became fluent in 6 languages, including Hebrew, Aramaic, Hindi, English, and Baghdadian, or Judeo-Arabic. In 1876, she married Salomon Sassoon, son of David Sassoon, and an important member of the family business. Flora became involved in the trade and developed into a notable hostess, all this while maintaining her strong connection to Judaism, for you see at her parties she served only kosher food. When her husband passed away in 1894, she took over his business responsibilities along with caring for the 3 children they had together. In the following years, while Flora was still in Bombay, Asiatic cholera and the bubonic plague struck in the city. Unlike other wealthy families in Bombay at the time, she remained and chose to be vaccinated, a move not all were willing to make. As a leader in her community, Flora's inoculation became an example for other Jews and the wider Indian community to do the same. You see, the vaccine was created by a young Jewish bacteriologist, Professor Valdemar Mordecai Hofkin, who had become close to the Sassoon family. He had developed a vaccine for cholera and was brought to Bombay to do the same for the plague. And so, through his efforts and a bit through Flora's example, hundreds of thousands of Indians were saved. But we digress. In 1901, Flora moved to England for the sake of her youngest daughter's medical care. She continued her influence as a hostess there, hosting weekly Shabbat teas with retired military men, scholars, and writers, as well as Chachamim. Her connection to Judaism is further evidenced by her insistence on always traveling with a minyan, a quorum of 10 men with whom to pray. She was a major philanthropist to Jewish causes, receiving thousands of letters and responding to each one. And quite remarkably, Flora never forgot the strong Jewish education she received when she was young. In fact, she herself read from the Torah in a synagogue in Baghdad, the same Torah dedicated by one of her ancestors generations prior. She was particularly knowledgeable in Sephardic rite and tradition, and her house in London served as a home for Chachamim and scientists, a place for conferences and innovation. Flora also wrote for the Jewish Forum, and was learned in manuscripts that were not publicly available yet, but were sources of major Judaic knowledge and philosophy. So, if it wasn't obvious, she wasn't a typical woman of that time, but nothing seemed to stop her. In 1924, she was the first lady chairman at an annual speech day at Jews College in London. More so, her speech was filled with Talmudic references, reflecting her vast knowledge. At one point during the speech, she refers to a practice of women in Talmudic times mentioned in the tractate of Ketubot, Darguni de Mischak Arisha de Rabbanan. As she explains, Rashi interprets this practice as the women used to anoint the scholars' heads with oil, a reference, as Flora understood it, to Shmana shel Torah, the oil of the Torah. And this is just one example of an extensive speech that ends with a Talmudic reference, for as she quotes, "One should not part from a friend without mentioning words of Torah." So now next time you get a pop quiz with a description as glorious as the one we mentioned, you'll know it can only be Flora Sassoon. For she certainly walked like a queen, talked like a sage, and entertained like an Oriental potentate. And we might even add, all the while, staying true to her Jewish identity.